Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archeo Viking. Today is the second video I am doing for Halloween. The subject of today's video is a look at the evolution of demons and other psychopomps in medieval Chinese culture. So, first, right off the bat, pretty sure everyone watching this video uh, is in some way familiar with the term demons. Demons are in popular culture, especially one of the most well-known beings, taking a variety of forms, such as this one you see here, which is typical of, say, fantasy novels or tabletop games like in fantasy realms like D&D. Some demons take on more metaphysical. Okay, they're already metaphysical, but they take on even more metaphysical forms in horror movies where they are essentially beings that just possess people, such as in Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, or The Last Exorcism. Uh, and then, of course, they also show up in typical sort of fantasy movies, again, oftentimes taking on more stereotypical demon shapes, like the earlier picture, uh, the first demon picture I showed, such as in the movie Legend, where a demon played by Tim Curry shows up in very stereotypical devil shape. Basically shows up in the form of what most people picture the quote unquote devil uh, as. And then another very common figure in horror motifs and fantasy motifs is that of death, also known as the Grim Reaper, which you can see here. And this the Grim Reaper, death, what have you, shows up itself in a variety of different horror movies, such as this horror movie starring Danny Trejo and Vinnie Jones, just simply titled Reaper, Sinners Be Warned, uh, as well as this horror movie here titled Jack the Reaper. Now, of course, that is not in any way the full picture. These are very much sort of modern manifestations, and in a lot of ways, combinations of past religious and spiritual beliefs, cultural beliefs as a whole. So, with that in mind, it's important to note that what the Chinese death deities, which would be cool equivalent to some degree with the Grim Reaper, and what traditional Chinese demons look like. So, some examples of what these might look like, for example, death deities, similar to, say, the Grim Reaper, would be oftentimes Yama or King Yama, the judge of the dead. And then in terms of quote unquote demons or creatures we would in our modern world think of as demons would be beings such as Oxhead and Horseface. And we'll talk about all three of these figures in a little more detail later on in the video, but generally that's the gist of sort of within Chinese culture what we would think of as, again, a death deity or a grim reaper like figure, and figures who are very similar, though not necessarily quite the same as quote unquote demons. Okay, so now it's going to be important to define some key terms. First, starting with Psychopomp, which is a spirit, angel, demon, deity, or creature that guides deceased souls from Earth to the afterlife. And then you have demon, which is broadly defined as an evil spirit or devil, especially one thought to possess a person or act as a tormentor in hell, with the word demon specifically being derived from the Greek daimon. And then the word daimon, the Greek daimon, is essentially a supernatural being that is a mix between a god and a human. Daimons are not necessarily good or evil, but instead help define a person's character. In ancient Greece, a personal daimon was similar to a modern guardian angel in a lot of ways. Now, of course, it's not a one-to-one comparison, um, but it's sort of the best comparison we've got. Then we come to the word mo, which is Chinese for evil spirit, devil, or monster. Um, and the word is derived from the Indian Sanskrit Mara, with Mara itself meaning evil beings or death. Then we have the Chinese word Yao, which means goblin, witch, monster, or boogeyman. And I should state that these are sort of the best translations for these words into English, because obviously there's some meaning may be lost in translation, but generally this is what these words mean. And then with these words, we get mythological figures such as the Yao Guai, which is the Chinese word for it, and yokai, which is the Japanese word for it, which are essentially creatures that blur the boundaries between the natural and the unnatural, the human and the non-human. They possess supernatural power that distinguishes them from other monsters, such as shape-shifting, enchantment, creating illusions, hypnosis, controlling minds, causing disease, clairvoyance, and the draining of life force. They can be benevolent and malevolent to humans, and they are often associated with demons. However, this is a misnomer, as demons in the religious sense are termed mo rather than yao. A more accurate comparison would be mythical creatures of the Europe, such as fairies, centaurs, satyrs, etc. And then we have the creatures known as mogwai or mogui. Those of you who heard that name just now might recognize it. And yes, this is what the creatures from Gremlins are based on. But mogwai are essentially demons in the religious sense. The word usually refers to demons in the sense of Buddhist scriptures and Hinduism, such as rakshas and yakshas, derived from Indian lore before being incorporated into Buddhism. And I should state that these that even the word demon doesn't quite fit with say Malguai or Mo, but they're still the closest comparisons we have. All right, so now this brings me to our next section, pre-Buddhist Chinese monsters that appeared roughly between 3300 BCE and 403 CE. So pre-Buddhist Chinese culture had many monstrous creatures, often equated with quote unquote demons, but were more accurately fit the categories of mythical creatures such as, say, fairies, cyclopses, ogres, chimeras, goblins, etc. One of the earliest of these monsters, of these mythical creatures, is that of Dao Dai, the gluttonous beast, which appeared, or at least motifs that are thought to be this creature appeared in the archaeological record as early as 3300 BCE, with this creature remaining popular as a motif and remaining a key part of Chinese spiritual, folk, and religious beliefs, really, I believe, up until the modern day, but definitely up until 403 CE. I should state that most of these creatures I'm going to show are still very much present in modern Chinese and East Asian spiritual, religious, and folk beliefs. But for the purposes of these videos, I am going to just show their existence up until 403 CE. So, anyone watching this from, say, China, Japan, South Korea, etc., I promise you, I'm not trying to deny that these are still currently part of your spiritual beliefs. So, Then we have the Shang-Chi, which was a cruel, man-eating creature, sometimes described as a bull, other times described as a winged tiger bull hybrid, which was first mentioned in Chinese texts um, as early as 400 BCE, and would again continue to remain a key part of Chinese mythology and religious and spiritual culture up until 403 CE and onwards. Then we also had the Ao Yin, which was a man-eating ox monster, much like Jiangxi, was first mentioned in Chinese text as early as 400 BCE, and continued to a lesser degree than Shang-Chi and Dada, but still continued to uh, be a key part of Chinese religious, spiritual, and folk belief and mythology up to 403 CE and onwards. One of the most enduring creatures within Chinese mythology that we need to talk about is the Hula Jing, or a fox spirit, which is, again, sometimes a monster, sometimes demigods or sort of agents working on behalf of the heavens. Uh, and, they're also among the most powerful mentioned creatures in mythical creatures within Chinese religion, mythology, spiritual practice, folk belief, etc. And they show up in, are first mentioned and depicted in Chinese texts and murals as early as 400 BCE, and remain popular in all of East Asian religious, spiritual, and folk beliefs and mythology through 403 CE and into the modern day. All right. Now, this brings us to our next section, pre-Buddhist retribution in China, 3000 BCE to 403 CE. So, what were the types of pre-Buddhist Chinese retribution? Well, broadly there are three categories. I mean, there are more categories, sort of subcategories, but broadly a lot of them fall into these three primary categories. With the first category being ethical retribution, which is retribution built around reciprocity, specifically giving a gift in return for a gift. To not give a gift after receiving a gift is breaking the rules of reciprocity. And in fact, this type of retribution can be used to keep a person permanently in debt, i.e., say, I give somebody an incredibly expensive gift that they cannot afford to buy. What it means is you have to give an equivalent gift, I should say. You know, you have each gift has to be roughly equivalent in price. So if I give somebody an incredibly expensive gift, um, and they don't have enough money to buy a gift of equal value, then I can keep them in my debt because have essentially broken the rules of reciprocity by not giving me a gift of equal value in return. Then the next category is that of heavenly retribution, which is retribution from deities or heaven. And it can be good or bad, with rewards such as blessings coming to people who do good, and punishments such as plague or poor harvests for people who do bad. Then the third category we have is demonic retribution, or retribution inflicted by ghosts or evil spirits, often in the form of vengeful spirits seeking justice for, say, murder or other crimes. Evil spirits can also act as judges or repairs of human behavior on behalf of heaven. In the latter case, retribution can be good or bad. And here's the source I got for that information. So, what are some examples of ethical retribution, heavenly retribution, and demonic retribution? Well, an example of ethical retribution can be seen in the poem Quince, found in a collection of poems known as the Book of Songs, also known as the Classic of Odes, which was published sometime in the 500s BCE. And I apologize for these weird things down here. I'm not sure what happened there. But the poem reads, and I quote, "She tossed me a quince. I repaid her with a precious girdle gem. But this was no repayment. It just shows that I'll love her forever. She tossed a peach to me. I repaid with a precious greenstone. But this was no repayment. It just shows that I'll love her forever. She tossed a plum to me. I repaid with a precious stone of ebon. But this was no repayment. It just shows that I'll love her forever." So, as you can see here, this is an example of what I brought up in the previous slide, where essentially, uh, when the woman in this poem is giving, say, a piece of fruit to the man reciting the poem, the man in return is giving her something far more valuable, i.e., that in the form of various precious gems. Something of which, as you can read in the poem, she obviously has no ability to pay back with something of equal value. So by proxy, he is essentially keeping her forever in his debt. And then we have probably the most well-known type of retribution to anyone watching this, and that is of heavenly retribution. Specifically, the most well-known example of heavenly retribution being that the concept of a tyrannical ruler being able to be overthrown uh, by the Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven, which first appeared in Chinese as a specifically defined term in Chinese culture sometime around 1059 BCE, and continues to be a part of Chinese culture up until the present, up until at least the fall of the Qing dynasty, the last imperial Chinese dynasty in 1911 CE. And so basically, what the Mandate of Heaven is essentially a new dynasty or a new emperor takes the throne, and then everything works better in the empire for a little while, but then the government, say, becomes corrupted, obviously, normally as a result of money or power. And this results in things such as famine and natural disasters that destroy the commoners' faith in their government. The commoners then become tired of all the problems in their empire, and so they revolt, meaning that and because this revolt happens, that means that the dynasty is considered to have lost the mandate of heaven, and then the current emperor is defeated and a new one takes its place, and the process begins all over again. And that is essentially very much the textbook example of heavenly retribution within pre-Buddhist and also pre-Buddhist Chinese culture, and also Chinese culture after the introduction of Buddhism. And a good example of sort of this mandate of heaven is, for example, the Yellow Turban Rebellion, where essentially the belief after a result of famines and droughts and such, it was believed that the Han Dynasty had lost the mandate of heaven, which in turn would lead to the outbreak of the Yellow Turban Rebellion against the Han Dynasty. And I've already done a couple of videos on this, my video on the Han Dynasty and my video on the Northern and Southern dynasties, which will include both in the iCard. And this rebellion lasted from 184 to 205 CE, before eventually being put down by the Han Dynasty. And then one of the most simple types of retribution within these three categories is that of demonic retribution, because demonic retribution essentially can be a variety of things. An example of demonic retribution specifically being that of ghosts who return from the dead to haunt individuals who wronged them in life. Vengeance can be due to something as serious as a ruler unjustly killing his vassal, to something as mundane as a man remarrying after the death of his wife. Um, and this really began to show up around the 800s BCE, and continues to be something that is, I would argue, present in a lot of world cultures, not even just Chinese culture, even say our Western culture. Um, for example, the poltergeist, the concept of poltergeist or a vengeful ghost haunting a house, say the Amityville house or what have you. Um, in the United States, that's a fairly common motif. Though, of course, it's very much type of retribution and fear of ghosts haunting is very much present to this day in uh, Chinese and East Asian cultures as a whole. But again, I would very much argue that this concept of uh, vengeful ghosts and demon as a part of demonic retribution, I would exist in basically world as a worldwide phenomenon. All right, now we need to take a look at pre-Buddhist Chinese beliefs on the afterlife. So, what did the pre-Buddhist Chinese afterlife look like? Well, for one thing, the pre-Buddhist Chinese afterlife is described as a spirit world or netherworld that includes both the heavens and the underground. The netherworld is described as being located beneath the Yellow Springs, the Land of Darkness, and Mount Tai. The rulers of the netherworld include the Emperor of Heaven, the Lord of Underearth, and the Governor of Mount Tai. Time is described as moving slower in the netherworld, with 3 years in the netherworld equaling 30 years in the human world. An individual can only enter the netherworld after they have lived their predetermined lifespan. However, exceptions to this can be seen in a variety of different examples, such as the summoning of a hero 30 years before the end of his life, because the individual is capable, uh, as well as the returning of a father to the human world to care for his son, despite having lived his predetermined lifespan. Uh, when we look at and ask the question, what did the netherworld itself look like? Well, the life in the netherworld uh, is described to be the same as in the living world, with some individuals even becoming members of the netherworld's system of administration, mirroring Chinese Confucian concepts of imperial Chinese administration. The individuals within the netherworld are able to come and go from the netherworld freely, such as when a man left the netherworld in Chinese literature and folklore to share a drink with his brother. And here's the source I got that information from. And here's an example of Tai Shan, Mount Tai here. All right, now let's bring this to our next section, the spread of Buddhism into China from the Silk Road. So the Silk Road would facilitate the gradual spread of Buddhism into China from India sometime between 100 to 220 CE. And here's a map of the Silk Road here and the various kingdoms and empires that played key roles within this trade network. With the spread of Buddhism into China being heavily influenced by Chinese trade with the Kushan Empire and the Sogdian kingdoms in Central Asia. And we can see this in things such as Sogdian Buddhist murals and Han Dynasty coins with Kushan Greek script on them. And then eventually, after about a century of slow diffusion into China, Buddhism would begin to be institutionalized as a main religion during the Jin dynasty, roughly between 266 and 420 CE, and the period known as the Northern and Southern dynasties, roughly between 420 to 581 CE. Here's the Jin dynasty, and here are the Northern and Southern dynasties. And I've already done a video on the Northern and Southern dynasties, as well as the Jin dynasty, that I again will link in the iCard. And here is an example of a Buddhist carving, religious carving and such, that was first commissioned and carved out during the Northern and Southern dynasties, specifically during the Northern Wei dynasty, which you can see outlined here on this map. All right, so now that brings us to the next question. What mythical creatures from India and Buddhism appear in medieval Chinese religion? Well, for one thing, with the introduction of Buddhism into China, the pre-Buddhist concepts of the Chinese netherworld, located beneath the Yellow Springs, the Land of Darkness, and Mount Tai, would fuse with the Buddhist Naraka, also sometimes translated as purgatory or hell, to become the 10 courts of Du, also known as the realm of the dead, or again sometimes equated with hell, where souls would be taken after death to atone for the sins they committed when they were alive. However, DU is not forever, as the duration of an individual's stay depends on the severity of the sins a person has committed in life, with people being able to eventually be sent to reincarnation after receiving their due punishments. And here's some depictions of DU here. Then, at the same time as this was happening, Indian and Buddhist demons, also known as Mara, would become part of Chinese religious cosmology, first appearing in the early medieval China in a collection of tales of the supernatural known as the Yoming Lu, which was published sometime between 403 and 444 CE. These creatures included, but were not limited to, bloodthirsty Indian and Buddhist monsters known as Rakshasas and Yakshas, which would enter Chinese culture. In some cases, they would most certainly remain man-eating monsters for heroes and warriors to slay. But in other Chinese Buddhist texts, they were also described as jailers in the 10 courts of Du, tasked with the punishment of criminals, and were also sometimes described as guardians of scripture upon conversion. And again, they first appear in the Yoming Lu, which was published sometime between 403 and 444 CE. And here are some pictures. For one thing, here's some traditional Indian and Hindu depictions of a Rakshasa here and a Yaksha here. And then here are some depictions of Rakshasas and Yakshas in Du, in Chinese and Korean and Japanese scrolls known as quote unquote hell scrolls, depicting the realm of Du. And here's some more depictions of them meting out punishment to individuals within the 10 courts of hell, 10 courts of Du. And here's some pictures of Rakshasa guardians in the Chinese temple, and then a red-skinned Yaksha statue. Then, at the same time as Rakshasas and Yakshas were entering Chinese religion and spiritual practice, so too were Buddhist ox and horse-headed demons, which would enter Chinese religion, where they would become the guardians of Du. And they would also have the role of capturing human souls who had reached the end of their earthly existence and would bring them before the courts of DU of hell. Souls would then be rewarded or punished based on the actions performed in their lifetime. And you can, and again, these figures first appear in the Yoming Lu, which was published sometime between 403 and 444 CE. And here is a medieval East Asian hell scroll depicting Horsehead and Oxhead and Horseface meting out punishment to individuals in DU. And here's another one here showing a similar scene. Again, at the same time as the ox-headed and horseface demons, as well as Rakshasas and Yakshas, were entering Chinese religious and spiritual practice. The Buddhist god of the underworld, ruler of Naraka, and judger of the dead, Yama would enter Chinese religion, maintaining his role as the god who presides over both punishments or sins for sins mortals committed in life, as well as presiding over the cycle of reincarnation. However, Yama and the DU, the realm of the dead, would adopt traditional Chinese Confucian and bureaucratic characteristics, such as Yama becoming King Yama, who would then judge the dead in court trials. Another characteristic of this Confucianization, this adoption of Chinese Confucian and bureaucratic characteristics into DU, into the Buddhist and Chinese hell, would be that of the detailed record keeping of human lifespans, as well as the use of Chinese-style punishments, such as making souls water inspectors for the canals of DU, rather than traditional Buddhist punishments. And all of these things, again, would show up in the Yoming, first in the Yoming Lu, between 403 and 444 CE. And here is the Buddhist depiction of Yama in, I believe, Tibetan tapestries. And then here is the Chinese conception of King Yama. As you can see here and here, he's very much adopted a very much a Confucian bureaucratic persona. And here's another depiction of that as well. And again, all of these depictions are from medieval East Asian quote-unquote hell scrolls. All right, so now this leads us to our next section, the aftermath of the adoption of Indian and Buddhist mythical creatures into China. Well, for one thing, King Yama, Oxhead, and Horseface, Rakshasas, and Yakshas remain prominent figures in Chinese and East Asian Buddhism, as seen in several hell scrolls, several of which I've already shown. But this is very much something that has continued from 444 CE well into the present. A good example of these hell scrolls, the continued depiction of Yama, Oxhead, Horseface, Rakshasas, and Yakshas on these hell scrolls, these East Asian hell scrolls, is that of this depiction here from Taizong's hell scroll, specifically scroll 21, which was commissioned in 1735 CE. And again, you can see King Yama here with a very much Chinese Confucian style garb and administration. And here are Oxhead and Horseface meting out punishment. We already saw this depiction a little bit earlier in the video, but this is just for clarity of where this depiction originally came from. Meanwhile, it's important to note that Rakshasas and Yakshas, after being introduced to China, would eventually, with contact between China and Japan, would enter Japanese religion, especially with the spread of Buddhism, and would then fuse with the indigenous Japanese Oni, with the Oni taking on characteristics such as being wardens in DU, the realm of the dead, also known as Hell, which was specifically called Jikoku in Japan, with the earliest diffusion of Rakshasas and eventual fusion with the Oni in Japan happening sometime in the 500s CE. And here's a depiction of Shuten Doji, one of the quote unquote kings of the Oni in Japanese mythology. And here's some depictions of Oni meting out punishments in Jikoku, the Japanese version of DU. King Yama, Oxhead, and Horseface would also enter Japanese religion with the spread of Buddhism, with King Yama becoming King Enma, and then Oxhead becoming Gozu, and Horseface becoming Meizu. And again, they would enter and fuse with Japanese religion sometime in the 500s CE. Another interesting thing to point out is Rakshasas are oftentimes antagonists in East Asian stories, with Rakshasas specifically being the primary antagonists in the short story of the Rakshasa Country in the Sea Market, which was a short story published in a collection of short stories called Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio, which was published in 1740 CE. And then it's important to point out that Oxhead, also known as Gozu, and Horseface, also known as Meizu, appear in multiple comic books, such as Hellboy, which you can see them from the Hellboy comic that they first show up in, and in multiple different anime, such as Inuyasha, where they are more often than not, called Gozu and Meizu, which makes sense because that's the Japanese names for Oxhead and Horseface, and being that anime, like Inuyasha, are from Japan, you would expect them to be called by their Japanese names. And I believe that this is Gozu and this is Meizu, but it's been a while since I've watched Inuyasha, so sue me if I mix them up. Very similarly, King Yama, also known as King Enma, and Rakshasas and Yakshas, also known as Oni, appear in many modern anime series such as Dragon Ball Z, with this being King Enma here, and this being one of the various Oni that show up in the realm of the dead, in Hell, specifically in Dragon Ball Z. All right, so with that brings an end to our second and last video for this year's Halloween. I hope you enjoyed learning about more about Chinese and East Asian religious and spiritual beliefs as a whole. I hope you enjoyed learning about these fantastic and strange mythological creatures, especially in context with Chinese history and Chinese archaeology, as well as their contact and eventual fusion and synchronization with outside religious beliefs from Buddhism and Hinduism. If you would like to see me cover any of the subjects I mentioned in this video in greater detail in later videos, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. And remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you all have a good day.